Namaste and welcome to this edition of The Right Stand. I'm Anand Narasimhan. Ladies and gentlemen, the decision by the ICHR panel to say that those who are involved in the Moplah riots, the Moplah genocides as many call it, and some term it the Moplah rebellion, cannot be martyrs linked to the freedom movement of our country. That includes K. Haji and 387 others. Why? Why would they say something like this? It's caused quite a furor, a political furor. But one must understand that if the Moplahs at that time, back in 1921, almost 100 years ago, decided to establish the rule of Sharia in the Kozhikode, Malappuram, northern Kerala region for a brief period of time and were collecting jizya from Hindus. Jizya is tax. From Hindus, were they really looking at freedom? Was it really about democracy and that which is inclined to this civilizational root of India, that is Bharat, as is enshrined in Article 1 of our Constitution, ladies and gentlemen? Our Article 1 of our Constitution begins with this line, India, that is Bharat. So, those who claim that there is a deliberate attempt to distort history, was history earlier distorted or is it being distorted now? The so-called Khilafat movement had got nothing to do with Khilaf or going against or non-cooperation. It had to do everything with the Caliphate. And this Caliphate at that time was being established in Turkey. What has a Turkey movement to establish a Caliphate in Turkey got to do with the freedom struggle in India? How is it linked to uprooting the British rule or the first organized rebellion against British rule in India? Earlier in the day, I spoke to the National Executive Member of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, former BJP National General Secretary Ram Madhav, who had also said that the Moplah riots or the Moplah genocides were a reflection of the Talibani mindset that we are all today abhorring, criticizing and saying is not required in society. The Moplah riots finds its genesis from the same very offshoot of fundamentalism and radicalism from which the ISIS also finds its inspiration. Listen into what Ram Madhav had to say. Joining us now is Sri Ram Madhav ji, is the National Executive Member of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Ram Madhav ji, namaste. 100 years since the Moplah riots, and at a remembrance function, you talked about this being a mindset, a Talibani mindset. It's not a group of people, and this has existed for more than 100 years and it has manifested itself. Somewhere you have challenged those who account the Moplah uprising or the Moplah rebellion as perhaps one of the first uprising collective fight against British rule. Did it actually have anything to do with the freedom movement, or was it some other ulterior motive altogether?
No, firstly, one has to visit the contemporary accounts of the so-called Moplah rebellion in 1920s. The accounts of that period, not the whitewashed accounts of the leftists and liberal historians post-1970s, when an attempt was made to project those who were involved in that Moplah atrocities as freedom fighters. In 1971, suddenly the Kerala government had one fine morning declared all those people involved in Moplah riots as freedom fighters. But if you read the actual reporters of those incidents, whether in the British records or the views of the contemporary political leadership like Gandhiji, Ambedkar, Annie Besant, or even the fiction, the plays written about Moplah, if you read them in Malayalam and other languages, and more importantly, the media reports of that time, all of them highlight the fact that it was less of a revolt, less of a rebellion for freedom or anything, more of a communal pogrom, where thousands and thousands of houses were destroyed. Hindus were subjected to innumerable difficulties, innumerable cruelties. They were killed. The women were subjected to huge harassment. Temples were destroyed. All this was recorded. No, you must remember that in 1921, there was no RSS or no Hindutva. It was a contemporary account of it, which is available even to this day. In 60s and 70s, the Western researchers who have studied the political evolution in Kerala have written about it. All this is there. And what the communist government in Kerala is doing today, in the name of 100 years celebration of Moplah rebellion, it's not actually projecting the real Moplah rebellion. Instead, a whitewashed version where villains become heroes.
But somewhere it's not just the left. Even Congress leader Dr. Shashi Tharoor has said that this is an attempt to communalize history when you strike off the list of 387 people from the list of martyrs. They say it is a communal effort. A former ICHR chief has also come out and said that this is a political decision. Mr. Narayanan has said it's a political decision.
And I mean, probably Mr. Shashi Tharoor and Mr. Narayanan do not know that of the names that are being deleted, there are a number of Hindus. The names that are being deleted, the over 300 names, which have been inserted in the freedom fighters list, are being removed for historical reasons. And it was done by a committee of academics headed by one Professor Isaac from Kerala, not from any RSS leader in Delhi or Nagpur. It was an academic exercise. They came to the conclusion that they cannot be categorized as freedom fighters, and those names that are being removed included the number of Hindus. So how come it is communal then? It is trying to set the record straight.
But Ram Madhavji, one more aspect is, did they actually push the Khilafat movement, or were they looking at the freedom movement of our country? Because both are two different aspects. In the 1920s, there was a lot of talk about supporting the Khilafat movement, which was actually the establishment of a caliphate in Turkey. And even the Congress under Mahatma Gandhi worked with the Muslim League to try and get support for Khilafat movement, which a lot of people said, what is this going on? We have to look at freedom of our country. What is a struggle for establishment of a caliphate and the rule of the Sharia in Turkey got to do with Muslims in India?
So first of all, it was a big historical blunder that Congress had committed at that time under Gandhiji's leadership, to mix up non-cooperation movement with a very parochial, non-Indian cause of Khilafat, which was spearheaded by the Ali brothers, Shaukat Ali and Liaquat Ali. And Gandhiji wanted to promote his non-aligned movement, non-cooperation movement together with Khilafat. Shaukat Ali and Gandhi together traveled in Malabar to mobilize the support. And to those worthies who are projecting Kunjamad Haji and all of them as freedom fighters, let me tell them that when Gandhi and Congress sought the support of Kunjamad Haji, Kunjamad's reply was, no, I can't support Congress movement of non-cooperation because we are a Hindu party. This was the communal thinking. He supported Shaukat Ali's call for Khilafat. Shaukat Ali always called for jihad for Khilafat. While Gandhi was wanting a peaceful freedom struggle, peaceful non-cooperation movement, Shaukat Ali, who was accompanying Gandhi, was calling for jihad. And what happened in Malabar was actually jihad. And when a couple of taluks, tehsils, came under their control, what they did was, it's a victory for jihad, so we are establishing Islamic state here, Islamic caliphate here. So that is why I said Islamic State, we started hearing about it in 21st century. But in India, we had the first Islamic State established in the most Talibani manner. You know, you must read Ambedkar's narration of the incident. It's so gory. So you cannot read also, you cannot talk about it. Such a dastardly cruelty was shown to women, to all of them. It was Taliban style. That's why I said, don't, first of all, justify Moplah rebellion by projecting them as patriots who fought for independence and all. It's all totally a wrong, complete distrust of history.
But this larger aspect of this mindset and effort to try and whitewash this mindset, why do you believe that there is a concerted effort? And the left have to be atheists. Why should they take a narrative which says that it was actually a rebellion of the lower castes against the feudal Hindu lords and the British? And that is why this was a rebellion.
The left are past masters in this trade, not just here. Here, of course, in India, we have seen innumerable examples of how they distort and present a totally different version of many historical events in our country. every fundamentalist Islamist, they have only problem with Hindus. When it comes to Hindus, even if Hindus do a good thing, they will be branded as communal. Whereas for them, even Aurangzeb becomes a big secular, ruler for this country. This is a problem not just in India, which we have been experiencing for many decades now from the left, globally. In Soviet Union, today's Russia, if you say that the Soviet Union, the Stalin's army had entered the Second World War in 1939, you will be jailed. They insist that no, we have not done anything until 1941. We only entered in 1941. This is what is called whitewashing and lying through the nose. I mean, without any hesitation, they lie. That's what they do about everything in this country. So that is their habit. There's a word coined for them. They are schizofascists. Schizofascists means they are themselves fascists. They distort history, tell lies, and do authoritarian things. But they call everybody else the fascists.
Is our history not communal, Ram Madhavji, or is there an effort to communalize, or should we accept? Because the country's partition happened on communal lines. This entire decade of 1920 to 1930 perhaps witnessed the most number of riots and a division between Hindus and Muslims in our country. So should we escape that? Should we not understand the depth of it and the intent behind that? Or is it time that the world actually knows? In fact, our country, the current generation actually realizes where we come from.
Yes, in Indian history, we have had certain horrendous chapters. One of them was this Moplah rebellion and the history of appeasement that Congress leadership had pursued through the last 2 decades of our independence, which had ultimately resulted in a very horrible partition of this country. We have to learn lessons from that history only to ensure that we don't repeat those mistakes again. We don't let the country partition once again. For that purpose only, even we are saying, let us talk about the true history of Moplahs. Now, those who are trying to push the true history under the carpet, push the sins of all those Moplah rebellion leaders under the carpet, are the real communalists. Because for them, their vote banks matter, not history.
And is it time to actually ask people to very clearly have this clarity in their mind that whether they're pushing for deen or democracy or desh or the establishment of Sharia?
Of course, see, a large section of Indian Muslims today do not want to associate with these kind of fundamentalist, rabid, anti-Hindu, and by extension, anti-India elements. A large section of them are there. But actually, the political leadership, the leaders like the communists, are the so-called secular leaders, even Congress leaders. They don't even go with the narrative of their own leader. Annie Besant was the president of the Congress at that time when she talked about it. Ambedkar was a respected leader of the constitution making team of our country. He was father of Indian constitution. If the Congress leadership of today doesn't want to even agree with their history, but wants to go with the history that the left peddles, the need of the hour is for all of us to understand that yes, we should not support the history that is full of communal bigotry. You use the word deen. Deen is a respectable word for Muslims, but that should not be used for political ends, political purposes. So that kind of history that teaches us lessons, but also teaches us unity is what we all should promote.
Ram Madhavji, always a pleasure speaking to you. We'll pause for the moment, but with the promise of picking matters of history and matters of national importance once again in the near future very soon. Always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that was Ram Madhav, and he says, let's understand our history so that we don't repeat the same mistakes again. But has there been an effort to try and gloss over history, tide it over, and any effort to actually correct it is being met with resistance? We'll also play out what one of the panel members, G. Isaac, had to say. But let's try and understand the arguments from both sides, the left and the right of it, if I can say that. As far as the Moplah rebellion is concerned, what do the left and the Congress have to say about it? What do the likes, what is the BJP or what is the ICHR saying now in terms of the truths coming out? First, nationalist uprising in South India is what it's being called. But this is actually a jihadi massacre of Hindus in Kerala, purely driven by religion. That is the argument. history being needlessly communalized, the realities are being distorted. The carnage was a communal riot. Then, rebels were heroes of a communist revolution, deserve special pension. In 1921, which form of communism was present in 1921 is a question many would ask. How was it communist? Many would ask. Can't give freedom fighter pensions to brazen Hindu killers, people who were driven by hate to a particular community and fellow countrymen at that time because they followed or they did not believe in their particular thing and followed another path. Also, rebellion, a peasant struggle against feudal landlords and British is the pitch. Hate is the motive. Hindus not converting were brutally killed. Why were there forced religious conversions, massive brutalization of Hindu women, and destruction of temples if it was just a feudal uprising? Rebels stood for revolutionary change in mindsets. Manifestation of the Talibani mindset in India is the counter argument that comes to the fore. It is all chronicled in history, ladies and gentlemen. I've tweeted some of the versions, the note that was written by Annie Besant, also the argument that was made at that time, what the newspapers of the day actually carried and what they called this entire devastation that had followed, the carnage that had happened, and it happened for months. Chief architect of the Constitution, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, hit out at the Moplahs. In his book, Pakistan or the Partition of India, B.R. Ambedkar wrote about the massacre, and I quote, he said, "The blood-curdling atrocities committed by the Moplahs in Malabar against the Hindus were indescribable. All over southern India, a wave of horrified feeling had spread among the Hindus of every shade of opinion, which was intensified when certain Khilafat leaders were so misguided as to pass resolutions of congratulations to the Moplahs on the brave fight they were conducting for the sake of a religion." This is all those who claim to be Ambedkarites and saying that we are upholding the Constitution as the spirit of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. This is what he himself had to say. So, who's correcting history? Who's communalizing history? Who's trying to gloss over or whitewash history? Moplah rebels, heroes, or Taliban-like fanatics? Let's get into the debate. Moplahs, not martyrs, is the hashtag. Sai Deepak. That's the hashtag there. J. Sai Deepak, counsel in the Honorable Supreme Court and author of India, that is Bharat, Coloniality, Civilization, Constitution, and in that order. It's part of a trilogy, and Sai Deepak, you have written till 1920 there, but I'm sure you have already started work on what happened in that decade, which many believe saw the most torrid of rebellions and Hindu-Muslim riots across our country, and it numbers into more than 600, many would say. Vikram Sampath has written it in his book. Rahul Roshan, he is CEO of India, is with us, and Professor Ajit Khanna, activist in Professor JNU, is also with us. So let's start with Professor Khanna. Professor Ajit Khanna, schizo-fascists, that's what Ram Madhav called the left and said you're deliberately trying to twist a narrative. They were not freedom fighters because they were not fighting for the freedom of the Union of India from the clutches of the British.
While I have to say that he is being biased with certain historical facts, especially Hindu versus Muslim. I'm not going to talk about Hindu Moplah or Muslim Moplah. Martyrs are martyrs. That's my first point. Second point is he's talking about riot. Any riot. Can you tell me every Babri Masjid demolition was a very decent riot? Unnao was a very decent incident. I'm not going to get into that kind of, divisive historical narrative. Let me get to this one. Ram Madhav sir seems to have problem with Muslims being considered as martyrs. This is my understanding. I'm not going to blame him or criticize him. He seems to have been biased. Every riot, every uprising, including the civil disobedience movement, so-called non-violent movement, was very, very dirty and nasty. Please read. I'm reminded of one incident. Please allow me to say one incident. Because I love history as a history teacher, when he says ICSHR, I'm reacting to ICHR panel members, the distinguished members. I'm sure they are aware of the storming of the Basti, 14th July 1789. What happened? Everybody knows, the world knows. The governor was saying, Lone was saying, please, I'm surrendering. Please don't, please stop rioting. Stop hitting our prisoners. They are your people. They are inside the prison. They'll come out. You know what has happened? He was produced in the council, in front of the council. Instead of asking him a question, he was straight away hacked to death. So, do we de-recognize him as a martyr or a person who rioted defending the Republic of France, or the guy who...
Let's talk about the Moplah. Let's talk about the Moplah massacre or the Moplah genocide. Let's talk about what happened in 1921.
It is so unfortunate to say that we are removing so many people from this record. Please remove it.
So, if their intent was freedom of the country, Ajit Khanna, then why did they destroy temples? Why did they convert? Why did they forcefully convert Hindu women? Why did they turn around? Why did they impose jizya on non-Muslims? So, if it was freedom of the country, then this should not have happened. Why was Sharia imposed? These are all fair questions to ask. Rahul Roshan, where do you stand? Let me get the others. Let me get their comments also. Rahul Roshan, where do you stand?
Yeah, I mean, the quotes that you had read out earlier by Baba Rao Ambedkar and Annie Besant, and you know what Mr. Ram Madhav said, those are all historical accounts. You know, these are not matters of opinions, and it's very those records very clearly set it out that what happened there was entirely driven by religion. Now, it so happens that fine, there were also British rulers involved, and just because they were on the other side, it becomes some kind of a nationalist movement or some kind of a movement to gain independence of India. That's just too much of a spin. That's just too much of dishonesty. You know what? And when they also talk about Hindu elites being there, and this was some kind of a pageant uprising, you know, dressing it up as some kind of a communist revolution, that also is complete hogwash. You know, and a very nice parallel is happening right in front of our eyes in Afghanistan, actually. You know, when these guys, all the Osama bin Ladens and then the Taliban, when these guys were being trained by US to fight the Soviet, army which has entered Afghanistan, then US also dressed these jihadis, mujahideens as some kind of anti-communist movement. Obviously, you just flip over, the terminology over here. But we all know that, you know, the Taliban or the mujahideens, back even then when they were fighting the Soviets, they were not fighting communism. They were fighting for Islam. They were fighting for Nizam-e-Mustafa. You know, it doesn't change at all that the warring side or the people that whom they were attacking were Soviets. That does not make them anti-communists. That makes them Islamist, and they remain an Islamist even today. And they are very much honest about their intentions. It's the people, you know, it's the history writers, it's the left people on the left, the so-called liberals, who try to dress up these things again and again. So what US did, you know, not very long ago in 90s itself, dressing up Islamist as some kind of a secular, force against the Soviets, they have actually done it way back, trying to dress up the Moplah guys who were completely only driven by Islamist agenda as some sort of either a pageant revolutionary or anti-British revolutionary, and both of these are factually incorrect by the admission of the same people who were leading the so-called rebellion. It was not a rebellion, it was a massacre, obviously, of Hindus. And they were very sure that the reason why they are doing it is, they are attacking the British because British was fighting the Ottoman Empire, which they considered as a very legitimate caliphate of a Muslim world. the entire idea of caliphate has existed right after Prophet Muhammad, and there is a grand vision among many Muslims that one grand caliphate should be there. And that idea, that vision, that mission was right there in the mind of these people, Ali Musliyar or the Haji. And they when they go on and kill people, when they go on and attack people, whether they be British or whether they be the Hindus whom the historians have dressed up as some kind of elite land-owning zamindars and all that.
Right.
They were all driven by what is written, in Quran, or they were all driven by the fact that they want to establish the caliphate, or rather they want to keep the caliphate, the Ottoman caliphate, intact. 1922 is when Ottoman Empire was, and caliphate in that sense was abolished. That is what they were trying to fight for. To retain that caliphate. And this is their own account. This is their own admission.
Rahul, just one sec. My screen is just conked, but I have it on my phone. This is a letter Annie Besant wrote to Mahatma Gandhi after the Moplah outbreak, after the Moplah riots. And I'm just going to read out a small passage before I go across to J-Sai Deepak. She is writing, and I read from her letter, and this letter, this entire extract is there in Sankaran Nair's book, Gandhi and Anarchy. And in this, how does Mr. Gandhi like the Moplah spirit as shown by one of the prisoners in the hospital? I'm just going to brighten the screen, and I'm reading this saying, how does Mr. Gandhi like the Moplah spirit when one of the prisoners in the hospital was dying from the results of asphyxiation? He asked the surgeon if he was going to die, and the surgeon answered that he feared he would not recover. Well, I am glad I killed 14 infidels. This is what the person said. The brave, God-fearing Moplah, whom Mr. Gandhi so much admires, who are fighting for what they consider as a religion, and in a matter they consider as religious. Men who consider it religious to murder, rape, loot, to kill women and little children, cutting down whole families, have to be put under restraint in any civilized society. This is what Annie Besant has said. There is far more that she has written in this entire excerpt that I have produced, ladies and gentlemen. J-Sai Deepak is also with us. Sai Deepak, this is where, and this is another, as I come across to you, Sai Deepak, this is a published journal put out on the Oxford website by somebody who is supposed to be a secular historian. And here they write, they call how the shift of narratives happens, where they have turned around and said that the likes of Muhammad Habib were the first to try and change the social memory of the likes of Mahmud of Ghazni, where they turned around and said that his loot, plunder, desecration, destruction of the Somnath temple was not religious bigotry or hate, but purely lust for wealth. So this is how our history is distorted. If you cannot talk about Aurangzeb, talk about Akbar to balance the history, to shift the narrative. Sai Deepak.
So I don't think even talking about Akbar is going to help the case of these historians, because Akbar was himself not as secular as he was made out to be. And it's recorded history that he even participated in the open massacre of sadhus and Nagasadhus, so to speak. That's recorded history. And this is something that's out in the public domain. Nobody needs to fabricate or invent these facts. Coming to this so-called Moplah rebellion, it was not a rebellion. If it was a rebellion, it was a rebellion against the British for the establishment of a Khilafat, of a caliphate. So each time they say they fought against the British, we don't talk about what was the end goal there. What is it that they were actually pushing for? They were certainly pushing for the establishment of caliphate. That is the clear fact. Point number one. Point number two. The statement that Professor Khanna made about why are we communalizing history? Why are we actually giving it a religious picture? Why are we secularizing history is my question. At least learn to accept facts for what they are and what they were, when specifically the aggressors specifically spelled out their own goals. The contemporaries recorded these facts. It is recorded for a fact that they specifically went after Hindus as being conspirators along with the British. They saw British and Hindus as being aggressors who had occupied Muslim lands, and therefore they decided to go after both. So to turn this into a peasant rebellion, I'm so sorry, is a retrospective secularization of history, which according to me is harakiri, and this is a denial according to me of a war crime. This was a specific call for jihad against Hindus as being people who had conspired with the British to take over what they felt was their property, and not just property, religious property. So if the call for this particular rebellion starts with a jihad, it's no more a rebellion. It takes a very specific religious hue. That's point number 2. Point number 3. I mean, when people have this fetish for actually reading out atrocity literature when it comes to Gujarat and other places, from ripped fetuses to gang rapes to whatnot, Moplah riots saw everything.
Yeah.
Ladies were actually paraded naked in front of their families and gang raped in front of their children, husbands and brothers and even their parents. This is the nature of the rebellion. Not just that. The one disagreement that I certainly have with Mr. Ram Madhav's statement is that I'm not really sure that large sections of people don't believe in this or they don't share this particular opinion. That only time will decide, for the simple reason that even as early as a few months ago, a movement or a march of sorts was taken out in Kerala by members of the PFI celebrating this very same or commemorating the Moplah riots. And not just that, they had certain people mock chained as, let's say, as slaves, and they were dragged on the streets to basically remind people that this is capable of happening again. Number 3, when the anti-CAA protests were going on in Kerala, what was the war cry or what was the slogan of the people who actually took out these protests? They specifically said, "Do not forget 1921, we haven't thrown our swords in the Arabian Sea." What kind of language was being used? So when the dramatis personae and the descendants, so to speak, are very clear about the nature of this particular atrocity, the religious nature of this particular atrocity, why are victims expected to secularize this? This is denial of a war crime according to me, and in any other country this should be punishable with an offense. It's unfortunate that in this country anybody gets away with whitewashing of anti-Hindu genocides and we're expected to put up with it. I'm sorry, I think the professor is true to his roots in JNU, and this is the exact kind of history that JNU has become infamous for, and they should sit and learn from the history, from the lessons of history, instead of teaching this kind of nonsense to students.
Well, this is what
enablers of genocide of the first order.
Okay, I know, Sai Deepak, it vexes you, but the fact is that there are those who are teaching. This is what is being taught. But I'm just going to pull out an excerpt from Vikram Sampath's book, because he's quoted another book, and this is the excerpt from the Times of India. This is what it says. One of the terrible fallouts of the failure of the Khilafat movement's stated objectives was the murderous Moplah genocides in Malabar that have been discussed earlier. The Times of India, reporting widely on these atrocities, said the rebels captured beautiful Hindu women, forcibly converted them, pierced holes in their ears in the typical Moplah fashion, dressed them as Moplah women and utilized them as their temporary partners of life. Hindu women were threatened, molested and compelled to run half naked for shelter to forests abounding in wild animals. Respectable Hindu gentlemen were forcibly converted and the circumcision ceremony performed with the help of certain Musliars and Tangals. And the excerpt is being quoted from another book where the entire article and many more such articles are written, and it sends a shiver down your spine or a chill down your spine and vexes one a great deal that all of this has been very conveniently glossed over. 100 years later, there are those who argue that such people who put women to sword, raped women, forcibly converted people, brought down temples for establishing a caliphate in our country are supposed to be treated as martyrs, Sai Deepak.
This is exactly what I referred to as Middle Eastern coloniality in the book that has just come out, that such people who whitewash history effectively act as justifiers and enablers of past genocides and enablers of future genocides. That's the nature of their activity and that's the nature of their professional academism. I'm so sorry to say. That is precisely why this nonsense needs to be called out across academic campuses, because this is what is being fed to the next generation, and they will not have the guts for an open debate because facts go against them and they come up with value-added words like divisive communal. If history is communal, then you might as well have the guts and the spine and the vertebrae to recognize it as opposed to brushing it on the carpet like a coward.
True. Now, this is what another part of the essay. Now, this is what historians were trying to do, ladies and gentlemen. Earlier concern with facticity, that means whether we should be correct with facts or not, whether or not specific event happened, whether its memory was true or false. Historians have now turned to exploring the politics of memory. attempting to understand what is remembered and what is forgotten. So you convolute and you change the narrative in such a way so that you can gloss over certain aspects altogether and only highlight what can be or what is perceived to be politically and correctly convenient. Now, Rahul, let me ask you one thing. Where were the communists? Because the CPI came into fruition during the 62 war, and when V.S. Achyutanandan wanted to donate blood, and that's when the Communist Party of India, and he was expelled from the Mao party, from the Maoists. The Maoists expelled him. 1921, who was communist in our country? For them to say that this was actually communism.
Right, that's the kind of history these guys invent. And as I said, you cannot just dress it up as communism, just like you cannot dress up what happened in Afghanistan in 1990s as anti-communism.
Yeah.
Just because some of the people who were killed were feudal, or colonial powers, which that is the British, they don't become communist.
Right.
Even if we assume that somehow, magically some communists had descended from heaven. These are things communists don't believe. But let's assume that somehow some communists had descended from heaven. Where is that communist rhetoric? Where is that communist belief in the leaders of those who led this so-called rebellion and in actuality a massacre?
Yeah.
Why don't we have anything of communist nature by Ali Musliar and all that? Why the only red that they knew was the red color of Turkey,
Correct.
not of the Marxist flag.
Yeah, not
So
the hammer and the sickle. And
complete
the same the Musliar, the same K. Haji Rahul Roshan, refused to back Mahatma Gandhi in the non-cooperation movement, but said, I will back Shaukat Ali, Liaquat Ali in the Caliphate movement.
Exactly. These guys were not even, they were so true to their bigotry, and unlike, say, the Muslim League or people who were then coming up with the Khilafat Andolan, which was a nice way to,
Right.
trap Hindus into believing that some kind of common, cause is there against the British. The Khilafat leaders, the Khilafatists in that sense were very practical and pragmatic in that sense that they spotted an opportunity. But
Right.
these guys, the leaders of the Moplah rebellion, who are being dressed up as martyrs and freedom fighters, they were so true to their bigotry that they said no. This Congress is not our concern. They are a Hindu party.
Yeah.
And mind you, many of the people who I'm sure Sai also might have, or in the second book he might write about it, that as late as in the 40s, they were still enamored with this whole idea of Moplah being a special land that belongs to them. It has been mentioned in the book Creating of New Medina by Venkat Pulipala that they actually were dreaming of a independent nation called Moplahistan. And it's as late as the 1940s that they were actually thinking of it.
No, not just that. During the CAA protests, I know this is exactly what the PFI did, and Sai Deepak was right when they said that we have not sunk our swords in the Arabian, and they paraded the people and said we will repeat what happened in 1921. Yeah. So that mentality exists. So that's not got to do with the freedom movement. So then very clearly when they're saying that here, then it's not got to do with the freedom movement. Rahul and then Sai Deepak, I'm way over time, but yeah, quickly, yes, Rahul.
Oh. Yeah, so you have rightly pointed out, the CAA thing, the two young women who were paraded in Indian media as some sort of face of dissent, they're still, that picture is used as some sort of, standing up to the fascist forces and all that. Their own Facebook posts glorified, these communal, these guys are saying communal now, all this communal sloganeering, they stood by that we would shout La ilaha illallah, and this is our identity. We don't need to compromise. All kind of such communal nonsense were spoken about. And mind you, Shashi Tharoor today is calling this thing communal. Even somebody like him had tweeted that, okay, this is not something, I'm comfortable with. And these people shouted in his face when he went to Jamia, the same slogans, and he couldn't do anything.
No,
the Hindu thing.
I don't know who is talking over.
No, sir. I'll tell you what.
That's
I'll tell you what. If you are indeed
It's
the
not
left, sir, my point is the left idolizes somebody who is not from our soil. But the left, I don't know why, have become apologists for one particular religion and have so much of messiah for Hinduism. That's another aspect. Jai Sai Deepak, final word. Final word. Jai Sai Deepak. Yeah.
Left to such people, from Tipu Sultan to Aurangzeb to Moplah rioters to everyone who has killed a Hindu, according to them, is effectively leading a rebellion, is leading a communist rebellion. This clearly shows that communists are enablers and co-conspirators along with jihadists and Islamists. That has been the history in this land, and that is what is to be expected from them.
True. Now, I'm just going to wind up with this, ladies and gentlemen. Sindhu Paryanta Yasya Bharata Bhumika Pitrabhu Punya Bhumischaiva Savai Hindu Smriti Smrita. Hindu Riti Smrita. That means the one who considers this vast stretch of Bharat from the Sindhu, that is the Indus, to the Sindhu, that is the ocean, as the land of one's ancestors and holy land. He is the one who will be termed and remembered as a Hindu. This is the definition in Savarkar's thesis of Hindutva. Did the Moplahs in any way enshrine this love for Bharat? Or did they even consider India, that is Bharat, as part of Article 1 of our Constitution? We rest the debate on that note, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us. I thank all our panelists. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we turn our attention towards the Afghanistan crisis.